All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking two truly terrifying source accounts of what supposedly happens when humans push past the boundaries of the unknown. We're looking at some heavy claims of the paranormal, taking the source material as our guide to explore just how far human nature will go when driven by some of our darkest impulses.
I will grab your jaw and tear it completely apart. Now, we're starting off with this chilling threat, which the text says was spoken by a completely possessed fisherman, just to immediately drop you into the sheer horror of today's analysis. Both of the stories we're digging into today share a really dark common thread, which is human hubris. Specifically, we're talking about vengeance and greed, and the absolutely devastating, otherworldly consequences that the sources claim came next.
So let's kick things off with our first case study, the vice of vengeance.
According to the source, the catalyst for this entire nightmare was a forbidden romance in a rural Punjab village. Imagine this: a young girl is caught with a boy from a wealthier, landowning family. To save their reputation, her father brutally beats her. But what makes it worse is that she feels entirely betrayed by her lover, who seemingly just abandons her to face this brutal punishment all alone. So she vows absolute revenge. And this single vow, the source claims, is what triggers an unparalleled wave of destruction.
To actually get her payback, the text claims she turned to something incredibly dangerous. It's an occult practice known as the Lana Chamari Siddhi. The text describes this as a dark, tantric art, usually invoked by the oppressed or wronged to enact some seriously brutal revenge. The source details how she allegedly sneaked out to a local cemetery at 1:30 in the morning, performed these rituals completely unclad, and somehow successfully summoned a protective entity. The text describes it as an 8-foot-tall hovering woman that literally began stalking the village to do her bidding. And that brings us to the actual havoc of the terrifying forces she supposedly unleashed.
The source material lays out this rapid, terrifying succession of tragedies. It started with her ex-lover's father. According to the source, the man calmly wakes up, drinks a glass of water, speaks normally to his wife so he doesn't raise any suspicion, and then just walks to the roof and leaps to his death onto the iron gates below. Unbelievable, right? And not long after that, the girl's own father suffers a massive heart attack. The source actually notes a deeply chilling detail here. She supposedly stood over him laughing, refusing to give him water as he died. Later, after being forced into an arranged marriage, her new husband is suddenly killed by a truck. The text strongly implies she orchestrated this entire string of deaths through that dark entity.
But the horror relentlessly targeted the ex-lover's family too. First, his mother's legs inexplicably twisted backward, leaving her paralyzed and completely humiliated in front of the whole village. Then, in what's described as a bizarre trance state, the ex-lover himself actually rammed his heavy icon car directly into his own mother, breaking her legs even further. Ultimately, she died from a mysterious electrical shock from a home inverter while reportedly mopping the floor. Now, the source points out that mopping is a task a wealthy landowner would literally never do, pointing to a total unnatural manipulation of their lives.
As for the boy himself, the text says he was kept alive purely to suffer. He withered away from a healthy 90 kilograms down to a mere 40 kilograms. I mean, that is a staggering amount of weight to lose. He suffered from unexplainable ailments and terrifying night terrors of the girl demanding retribution. It wasn't until a local fakir, a spiritual healer, intervened and supposedly broke the curse that the boy's life was finally spared. The text claims the moment the curse broke, the girl actually ran out of her house screaming as if her body was on fire.
All right, let's shift gears to our second case study, the vice of greed.
We're moving from a rural village to the deep Arabian Sea, right near the India-Pakistan border. And the driving force here is one staggering number, 8 million rupees or 80 lakhs. According to the source, this is the street value of a single highly prized croaker fish. This massive payout is exactly what drove a fishing boat captain, or Nakwa, to completely ignore radio warnings from neighboring Indian ships and steer his crew straight into forbidden, notoriously haunted waters in the dead of night.
The source points out a crazy contrast once they crossed into this haunted zone. They immediately noticed a deadly silence. But even more terrifying, their electronic fish finders showed an impossible anomaly. Instead of swimming near the seabed like they usually do, an entire school of fish was hovering exactly 17 meters above the ocean floor. It was as if something massive and terrifying was lurking below them, practically pushing them up toward the surface.
Which leads us right into the terror of the sea demon.
So, despite every giant red flag, the captain's greed won out. But as they dropped their nets, the vibe on the boat went from eerie to violently hostile. The terror escalated so fast,
First, their heavy-duty nets, which were literally made from unbreakable bike clutch wire, snapped like they were made of string. Then, a notoriously sober crewmate named Irfan began acting bizarrely. The source details how he just stared at the water, repeatedly dipping his head in and out with a dead expression. He then violently devoured a raw, unclean fish before threatening to rip the captain's jaw apart with pliers. The possession culminated in Irfan allegedly levitating half a foot in the air while taking invisible, heavy blows to his stomach.
Still desperate for that massive payout, the crew threw out a live bait line. 7 men struggled against an immense weight, dragging them to the very edge of the ship. Suddenly, the line just went slack. Moments later, from the absolute pitch-black depths of the ocean, a live, entirely uninjured fish was violently thrown back onto their deck. The source presents this as a clear, mocking warning from the entity below, basically saying, you are playing with forces you do not understand.
Then, totally oblivious to the danger, another crewmate carelessly tosses a discarded food bone into the sea. Instantly, like a wild dog chasing a treat, the entity reacted. A massive surge of water flooded the deck, and absolute, unnatural darkness completely enveloped the ship. The crew was just paralyzed with fear. Shortly after, the tied-up Irfan calmly announced that the entity had finally left, and you better believe the terrified crew fled the area as fast as they could.
So what exactly was stalking them? Well, the source describes this creature as a terrifying humanoid figure with dead white eyes, sometimes taking on the appearance of a massive octopus lurking just beneath the waves. Local legends claim it follows schools of fish, dims the lights of approaching ships to stalk them, and has allegedly vanished entire crews without a single trace when they dared to enter its territory. So, let's wrap this up and look at the lessons we can take away from this terror.
Whether you look at these accounts as literal truth or just chilling folklore, both sources impartially point to the same underlying theme. Crossing into the unknown brings absolute ruin. In the village, a girl's thirst for revenge wiped out entire families and destroyed her own life in the process. Out on the sea, a captain's greed for 8 million rupees nearly cost his crew their sanity and their lives to a nightmare of the deep. It really leaves us to wonder, is any human vice actually worth awakening what lies in the dark? Would you ever dare to test the boundaries of the unknown just for the sake of revenge or greed? Thank you so much for exploring these terrifying source accounts with me on this explainer. Until next time, stay curious and keep seeking the truth behind the stories.